I haven't made a video in a while because I've been working on some cool stuff in Stormworks, but for now, here's a video on rocket stability with fins. Not only is this a Stormworks thing, but also a real life thing. So first we need to understand torque. If we have a pivot point and then a distance from the center to the end, that distance will be the radius. Because you can imagine if this thing were to spin in a circle, then, it's a circle, so it's going to be the radius of that circle. Now, if we have a force being applied perpendicular to the radius, I guess, for the object, or if you imagine the circle, it would be a force tangential to that circle, then you multiply that by the radius to get the torque. But if the force was applied at an angle, you'd have to use trigonometry to find the perpendicular force using sine, I think. But let's not go too far ahead. But that's what torque is. It depends on the distance and how much force. If we look at this, we can see we have a pivot point, but you can see that there's radius on the left and on the right. And there's a force being applied downwards on both sides. You could guess which way this is going to spin, and it's neither, if both of these forces are equal, because this one, in the positive direction, wants to spin it that way, and this one wants to spin it the other way. So if you were to imagine holding a meter stick above a pole, and you were below it hanging onto both ends on either side of the pole, it's not going to spin one way or the other because all the torque is equal. But that's just another thing we need to keep in mind. So again, torque is force times distance from the center. And if you have two forces being applied on either side of that pivot point that are in the same direction, which in this case downward, it won't go anywhere. I'm really bad at explaining, sorry. So now here we have a rocket. And you can see that we have this weird black and yellow symbol. That usually means the center of mass. So that's where it'll balance. And if you were to throw the rocket in the air and it starts spinning, it's going to spin around the center of mass. Or again, you can balance it. Or if it's a really big rocket, you can usually look at it and see that the center of mass will visually usually be around the center. Of course, it depends on a bunch of things. But that is essentially the pivot point. That's what it's going to want to spin around. So if we come over to this rocket, there's a lot going on. But we can see we have the center of mass here. And along the length of the rocket would be the radius. So from here to here, that would be the radius from the pivot point here. Or from here to here, that would be the radius. Now we can see that this rocket is flying straight up. We have all this drag force that is going straight down. But what if wind blows it around a little bit? Well, now you have force being applied not quite perpendicular, but you can imagine that force right here, if we do our weird little angle thing, it's going to be applying a force that direction on the radius. And what we know is that force in this way with radius is going to create a torque, trying to spin the rocket. And we can see right here, it's going to want to spin it that way because all the force is right here. Now, what about down here? Well, it's going to apply another force again, probably equal in magnitude, depends on speed and everything. And it's going to create another torque, but this time on this side of the center of mass. And what we see is that it's the same thing as right here. We have a force here, which is equal to a force here. So it's not going to spin. It's just going to keep falling over more and more. And that means that without fins, this rocket will just topple over if it gets into the wind. But now we can bring fins into consideration. So here we have, it's flying normally, but then it starts tipping over. The thing about drag force is it depends on surface area. I forgot to mention that. But here, we have fins this time, meaning there's more surface area, which makes more force. And that means that that same radius with even more force will create more torque going this way. And if you have more torque going this way than torque going this way, it's going to want to spin this rocket this way, correcting its direction. And it's the same but opposite for the other direction. So this rocket's going to want to try to stabilize itself the best it can, meaning it's going to fly more upwards. And that's the basics of rocket stability with fins. But there is one little problem, and it's dependent on where you put the center of mass. So for example, down here, if you were to have your center of mass really low, that means that the radius is going to be lower for the fins, meaning they could have a lot of wind, they could have a lot of drag force because of their size, but if the center of mass is too low, then they're going to not produce as much force, and the top could produce more force because of its radius. And that means that even if you have fins, your rocket can still topple over. So the way to fix that is to move the center of mass upwards. So you can see in this rocket, it's all the way up here, and the fins have a long radius in the same size, meaning they're going to produce a lot more force, and you can see that here. The top is going to produce a lot less torque than the bottom, and it's going to want to fix itself. Now, that will sacrifice controllability, or maneuverability, I guess, whatever you want to say, because if you gimbal your engine this way, it's going to want to correct itself because of the fins. So it is a careful balance, but if you just want a rocket to fly upwards, you want weight in the nose cone, which you might hear a lot, and you also want fins at the bottom. And that applies to Stormworks too. I have a couple of videos, but I don't know how to edit them, to be honest, so maybe some other time. But yeah, that's rocket stability. You're going to see me incorporate that into not only my real life rockets if I start doing those again, but also Stormworks stuff. And speaking of Stormworks stuff, I'm going to start it soon. I'm having trouble using like cosine and blah blah. Anyways, I will return within the next week, hopefully. Bye.